Well, welcome back to Civically Minded. I'm your host, Corey Wing. On tonight's episode, we have pastor, podcaster, author, and Christian funny man Keith Foskey. Many of you will know him from his podcast called Your Calvinist or his funny denominational videos. Maybe you've seen some of his sermons on his own channel from Sovereign Grace Family Church, where he's the pastor there in Jacksonville, Florida. And if that's the Keith Foskey that you know and love, which many of you do, then tonight's going to be a little bit different. Keith and I have had the opportunity of becoming friends over the last few months, and he agreed to come on to the show today and record an episode with me where we talk about the highs and the lows of what it means to be in full-time pastoral ministry. There's no job that is a greater calling and more rewarding than getting to minister to people in this pastoral type of role. But there's also very few jobs on earth that can be as difficult, as demanding, and quite honestly, downright painful sometimes. So strap in and stay tuned for a very vulnerable and very real episode of Civically Minded. Well, welcome back to Civically Minded. I'm your host, Corey Wing. I'm here today with the pastor of Sovereign Grace Family Church and, of course, the host of Your Calvinist podcast, X channel, all things Your Calvinist, my good friend and brother in Christ, Keith Foskey. Keith, how are you today, my friend?
Doing very well. Thank you, Corey, for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
For those of my audience that may not know, it's actually having you on again, and I messed up the first time and didn't record it. So for everyone in my audience, this is technically the first time that I've had you on. But for you and me, this is go number 2. So thank you for your patience and your kindness to come back on and do this again.
No worries. The first time allowed us to get to know each other better, and since then we've become good friends. And so we'll just call it the providence of the Lord that was our first time hanging out. That was intended for one thing, but God intended for another.
That's right. That's right. Well, you, you said we've now got to spend a little time together. We were both at the end of October, right over Reformation weekend. We were both in Fort Worth, Texas, at the Fight Laugh Feast conference, and we got to actually meet in person for the first time. Though we had spoken prior to that, and like you said, since then we've kind of you've become a very dear brother in that time to me, and I just honestly I find what you do so very helpful. I think that the humor, of course, and I know you've done some podcasts about the importance of humor in the life of the Christian and even ministerially. And I couldn't agree more. I wish I had that. My wife always says the one complaint she has about my online persona is she's always like, "You're so serious," and in real life, you're not this serious. You're a much more jovial kind of guy in real life. So I don't know why that doesn't translate on camera for me, but yours comes through in spades. And people in my church, people in my life, family members, friends, that if I mention your name, they're like, "Oh, I know who that guy is," and so it's been a immense pleasure to get to know you and to now call you a friend. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. I'm encouraged. So thank you.
Well, I wanted to you put out of it today is Thursday, December what 12th, December 12th, and 2 days ago, or at least that's when it dropped on YouTube for me. 2 days ago, you put out a video on the 10th about kind of ecclesiology, church. That a home church and all of that stuff is not the same as actually being part of a local body of believers, or in the PCA, what we call a particular church. Um, I loved it. I thought it was dead on, absolutely, straight down the middle, biblically, pastorally. I thought all of your points were correct exegesis of the passages. I think a lot of people, and this is true of this topic, but so many topics, especially that you and I would see on X and some of the other social media platforms. I think modern Christians seem to have a real problem in their exegesis of understanding what is a descriptive passage versus a prescriptive passage of scripture. And they'll take a descriptive passage of something that actually did happen. Yes, the text of scripture says XYZ has happened. And then they go, well, this is normative. And we have to sometimes go, You sure about that? So I'm grateful for what you did there. But kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, what I thought we'd talk about um, a little bit today is kind of the more personal step, at least for guys like you and I, of what does that mean for us? Because if there's anything in my short time of doing full-time professional ministry, I've been in and out of ministry honestly since I was 18 or maybe even yeah, about 18. I was touring with a Christian rock band back then. I was doing ministry. I've been on staff at churches before. But when I went on staff at Shear at the Presbyterian church I'm at now, that's really the first time in a long time that I've and I think probably the first time ever that I've went full time on pastoral staff at a church. And so even in the short time that I've been doing that, I've come to the realization that very few people understand what it is that we do. The general public just doesn't really have a real good understanding of what a pastor's life looks like. I get often, "Oh, you like work what, 1 or 2 days a week?" And I'm always like, "Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what we do." So, if you would, take a few minutes and kinda describe what, um, a normal pastor's life might look like, maybe what a week in your life looks like, and so my audience can understand, what is it exactly that we do?
Well, this is where it is difficult to say, there's a general pattern to the life of pastors because I meet so many people who do it so differently. So we'll start with me as one sort of odd sample in a in a cacophony of, you know, guys are going to hear this and, well, I don't do that or whatever. Most pastors who are seeking to shepherd their flock well, and that is our calling, is to shepherd the flock of God that is among us. Most pastors spend a good deal amount of time during the week studying for the purpose of teaching God's word. And so that's the part that I think is missed in the minds of people because a lot of people fail to realize that that is work. Um, Studying takes time, reading takes time. And if you think of how many books and how many articles and how many commentaries that you read just in preparation for a sermon, that in and of itself adds up to a tremendous amount of time. And this is why men who are bivocational, this is why I said it's hard to describe. For men who are bivocational, often they're doing that at night or in the morning or on their lunch break. And so I'm always grateful for the men who can do that and who are able to do that. I know that's a tough thing to do, is to have a 40, 50 hour week job plus do the work of ministry. So for me, I get up on Monday morning. I begin my work week on Monday morning with the study of God's word for whatever I'm going to be preaching the next Sunday. I'm fresh off of the having preached the day before, so I'll spend my Monday reading the text and writing the text. I handwrite the whole text. So whatever it is I'm studying, whatever it is I'm preaching, I'll handwrite it. I'll make connections by the time I'm done, I've got usually 4 or 5 sheets of paper with red lines drawn from thing to thing. And it looks like that conspiracy theory meme where the guy's, got the pictures on the wall and he's pointing to all the connections because I tend to be somewhat visual in how I understand written communication, and I want to see where the connection points are. And so I do that. And then Monday night, I teach a class. It's a community karate class at our church. Tuesday, I'm usually writing my sermon, typing, doing things because Monday I've studied. Tuesday, I've got to write. Um, Tuesday evening, I usually do my podcast, get it produced and get it put out. I don't want to say that's an easy part of my week because it's not easy, but the podcast is not scripted. Generally, it's an interview, just like what we're doing. So I don't have to do a lot of initial prep work. So long as I understand the topic that we're discussing, I can just go right into it. Wednesday, I'm usually prepping for the Wednesday night. the week ahead. So, if I'm teaching Wednesday night, which I do, I will have prepared that lesson a week before.
Mhm.
So, this Wednesday, I'm not preparing what I'm teaching, I'm actually preparing what I'm teaching for the next week, and that keeps me consistent because I know what's coming. And so, again, we're 3 days into the week, and the vast majority of it has been studying and prepping. Thursday, I spend the morning teaching at a ministry called Set Free, which is a men's ministry for men who are going through recovering drugs, alcohol, things like that. And so I spend that time teaching. And normally what I'm doing there is whatever I'm teaching my church on Sunday, I'm going to teach to them on Thursday, which gives me a preview of how I'm going to preach it. So I'm teaching it to the men and talking through it, answering their questions, seeing areas where I may need to either beef up or scale back on certain areas. And so that's become a nice little benefit for me. It gives me the opportunity to preview what I'm going to be teaching on Sunday. And then Thursday afternoons, if I do a podcast that's not my own, like yours, I'll put it on Thursday afternoon because that's when I kind of give my time to projects like that. So today I'm doing a podcast. When I'm done with you, I'm going to do some videos of my own for my channel. I'll be doing the screens for Sunday because we I do the music 2 Sundays a month. So I'll be doing the screens for the music for this week and preparing the outline. We're in the Advent season now, so our songs are going to be related to the incarnation. So I'll be choosing music, making screens. Again, all these little things that you don't think people don't think are work. Well, all these things take time, sometimes hours of preparation and trying to put together a worship service that's going to be meaningful and encouraging and biblical. And so normally by Friday, I'm picking up any pieces I've dropped.
Mhm.
So, throughout the week, if I've still got work to do on my sermon or I've still got things I need to finish at the church, I'm usually in the office on Friday finishing up for the week, answering emails, answering phone calls, responding to people who need me. And again, if there's a church meeting that needs to happen, like with a church member, I'll do that meeting either on Thursday afternoon or Friday. And, I try to do that later in the week rather than early in the week unless someone needs me, unless there's an emergency. I try to take Saturday to be with my family. Doesn't always happen, but if I can, I try to spend my Saturday with my family and then Sunday with my church family. So that's my week, and it's not always the same, but that's pretty much how I do it.
Well, and then, of course, you've got nowadays your Friday nights are you and your wife, what, around 10 o'clock, I think, are getting on and doing like a live stream Q&A type thing on your channel. I mean, so again, and everyone can say, "Well, yeah, but you seem to love that." I agree. I can love something, and it doesn't mean that it's not, work or I mean, professional athletes love what they do, but it's definitely work.
Yeah, and you mentioned Friday Night Live. That's a relatively recent thing. We've been doing it now for about 2 months, and it's become a nice thing to look forward to because I do get to spend time with my wife, even though we're in front of an audience of, a few hundred people watching us, it's still me and her, and so it's been a nice thing to look forward to. The only issue she's having is she usually goes to bed around 10. I'm a midnight guy. Every night I'm up till midnight or later. So for me, it's no big deal, but for her, it's like, she's starting to feel that the weight of the 10 o'clock. So that may move to 9 for her sake. But we do it at 10 because a lot of our audience is in Central Time and some even in Pacific Time. And so for us, 10 o'clock is 9 o'clock Central and 8 o'clock Pacific. So it puts everybody in the evening
Yeah.
versus if we did it at 8 o'clock Eastern, you'd be 6 o'clock Pacific time, I think, 6 or 5. So there's a method to the madness. Plus, it gets the kids in bed with plenty of time.
That's yeah, as someone who, again, has young children at home and also podcasts, believe me, that is I scheduled today when I knew our youngest would be down for her nap. I mean,
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then our 2 older ones are at school, and so a lot of times when I do, whether it's an interview certainly, or a lot of stuff on my channel is scripted, it's just me, um, and I wait. Yeah, it's like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and I mean, it is not uncommon for me to get to bed at 1 or 2 o'clock on a night that I'm filming, and my wife just kind of comes down at whatever time and goes, "Love you,"
yeah,
come to bed whenever, and you just kind of this is what our weird lives look like, right? So I mean, I toured with a band, like I said, years ago, and so I was part of me's always been used to you do what you do, life is weird, and
yeah,
seasons come and they go and they change, and all of that. So I would say my week, of course, like you said earlier, little different. I mean, because everyone that does this does it differently. Our church is about a 140-year-old church. um the buildings are not that old, but some days they feel like it. And so we don't have a ton of great office space or anything. So I work basically from home, as does
yeah,
our lead pastor, our head pastor. He works primarily from home. But, and I noticed one of the things you didn't mention at all, other than, if people need me, you kind of said that. And I love your um the way you said that, because what I know and what you certainly know is that's more common than the average person could possibly understand, so w- whether that's hospital visits or say your church family has 100 people, just for a nice round number. And I know we live in the age of the mega church, but statistically speaking, the average church in America is still under 100 people. So just for a nice round number, say you've got a 100-person church. Well, that's great, except that all of those 100 people have people in their lives that may or may not even attend your church, but they still sometimes want you as their pastor to interact with those people, you know?
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, how many times have either of us been at a hospital bed of a person that's not a member of our church, but they're a family member of a member, or they're the neighbor of a member? I mean, so you just Michael Foster said something on X this week that I found extremely helpful. Um, and I don't have it in front of me word for word, but in essence, it was that, the pastor's job is a people job. The part that everyone sees is the preaching or the teaching. And there are a lot of young guys that maybe even get into this work because they like that part. They like, man, I love to teach, I love to preach. Well, so do we, so do most
yeah,
guys that do this. But I found out really quickly, um, only ineffective pastors or guys that have kind of lost the plot have forgotten that this is a people business,
yeah,
and sadly, I think you and I have both been around the church our, whole lives, and or at least you've been in ministry a long time, and I grew up in the church and have been around the church my whole life. And I've known pastors that are inaccessible, and, that
yeah,
have 3 or 4 layers of, the executive pastor will meet with you, and the family ministry pastor and the XYZ pastor, and, and you can't really even get a meeting with the pastor. And rarely do I see that long-term foster health, in the body of the church. It may foster great health for the actual guy at the top who doesn't take any meetings, but, but I've had too many people come to our church and say, I was attending a mega church, and, we either watched a screen, or, we had a pastor, but I've never even met him. I tried to meet with him a couple times, and you just the layers of insulation were so, behemoth that you couldn't do it. So I found it very helpful that Pastor Foster said, this job really at the end of the day is about people. You're ministering to people. So kind of as a follow up, tell me what, and we'll do the counterpoint here in a second. Um, but first off, let's start happy. What are your favorite parts of being in full time ministry? What I mean, the things that just rev your engine, that you kind of go, man, if it was only this. this would be the best thing on planet Earth. Everyone would sign up for it.
Mm. Well, like you said, I think most of us like teaching. We like that m- ability to help people to see the lights go on in their head and to see connections being made that weren't made before. And there's a certain outlet for our creativity where we get to teach. And I'm not saying we should be reinventing the wheel or being overly creative in our exegesis, but we are, we're producing material to affect people. And I think there's a great sense of accomplishment in that. Um, you know, and this is in no way intended to disagree, but uh, Josh Bice, the head of G3, he posted something a couple months ago. Pastors, we're not, and he made this list, we're not entertainers, we're not comedians, we're not this. Well, on the list, he put content creator and podcaster.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, okay, I'm a podcaster. So I get it. That's not what we're supposed to do in the pulpit. But I kind of took issue a little bit with the fact that we're not content creators. What does that even mean? We are weekly producing material for people to ingest and digest and learn from. And this is why when a pastor tells me, "Hey, I'm thinking of starting a podcast or whatever," a lot of times I'll say, "Well, listen, you're already a content creator. You're already writing material. You're already doing this. Just, here's how you would do this in a different medium."
Yeah.
So I understand what Josh was trying to say, and I'm not necessarily repudiating him. That's not what we are, in the sense of, just like when back in the day when uh, Piper said, "We're not professionals." I don't know if you remember that.
I
Brothers, we're
do.
not
Yeah,
professionals.
I do.
Well, but we are, in a sense, if we are in vocational ministry, this is our profession. We should want to do it well.
Yeah.
We should want to do it as unto the Lord, just like I want a plumber to do his plumbing unto the Lord, and I want an airline pilot to fly to the glory of God. We're preaching and teaching to the glory of God because this is our calling and our job, right? This is my job. And so I think the part that most people enjoy who get into this, they do enjoy teaching. They do enjoy preaching. Not everybody. This is not every pastor's given to that. But a lot of the guys I talk to are, and that's an enjoyable part. I know you're going to ask me what the worst part is,
I am. Yeah, yeah. I am gonna do
but not to jump ahead, but I do enjoy the teaching part. I do enjoy the relationships that God affords me in ministry with people. I do believe shepherds should smell like sheep. That's a phrase I heard years ago and I've adopted it and made it my own. I really do believe that if we are not in and around and among our people, then we're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Um, and so if we lock ourselves in our ivory tower, so that we can burst forth on Sunday morning like we are the manna come from heaven, or we're the sage prophet, coming to speak to the lowly people. I think that's a bad picture to have of our ministry. I think the ministry is, you've got these servants who are serving together, and one guy just happens to be the guy who is uniquely gifted to stand among the people and say, "Thus saith the Lord." So that's my job, is to do that along with my other elders.
Yeah, I again, it's as a guy in the PCA, it's one of the nuanced designations that I appreciate that we say in our denomination is, you know, we have ruling elders and we have teaching elders. And yes, while biblically the office of elder or presbyteros is one who should be apt to teach, as you see in the text. I believe I think that said both in Timothy and Titus. But that, the big delineation between a deacon and an elder is the elders are apt to teach. So they all should be able to teach. But you're right, the giftedness, the unique giftedness for pastoral level teaching and preaching is usually rests on one guy, or if you're in a big church, maybe it could be a number of guys. But it's first among equals, right? I mean, it's not I'm up here and the other elders are down here, deacons are down here, members are they're the plebes, they're way down there. But oddly, we are in a day and age, and I think this has probably been true in a lot of other eras as well, but it's so obvious to see now. We're in a day and age now where whether it's mega churches or again, let's be honest, the content creation, podcasting, conference speaking, all of that world, uh, those aren't always the same. You can go to some conferences and the guest speakers and teachers are again kind of ivory towered and they're in a green room the whole time. They come out and speak and then they're, shuttled off to the airport to fly back to wherever it is they're going next or. And then there's other conferences where that's not what happens at all. They're in and among the people that are there, and they remember that, hey, without the people that showed up to hear any of this, none of this happens. So I'm
That's right.
I'm I'm very grateful that there are still a ton of and most of the men that I rub shoulders with and interact with are that second type, the guys that remember all of the reasons that they do this. And I would agree with you. And I'll be vulnerable enough to kind of share with my audience and share with you. And knowing that a number of my audience are people in my church, so they'll get to kind of hear this maybe for the first time. Um, I had not been on full time staff very long, maybe 6 months, when I came home one night and kind of sat down with my wife. Kids had went to bed, and we were kind of downloading, processing the day. And I said, "Sweetie, it dawned on me today." Something. And she was like, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "I feel like God kind of showed me," and I always hate lingo like that, especially as a Reformed Presbyterian guy, cessationist guy. But I don't know how else to say it, so I'm just gonna say it that way. That God kind of illuminated in my head that as a pastor, it's so much, and there's a reason that I think the Catholic Church and some of those early church nomenclature used the title father. That is somewhat the role, and that like a father to your own biological children, um, I can't ever be less than my 3 kids' dad. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't do things that would make them see me as less, if you get my drift. I could act in such a way, in the short term or certainly in the long term, that would diminish that role in the eyes of my children. I could act the fool, I could treat them harshly, I could, become a drug addict. I mean, any number of things could make that happen. But once that has happened, restoring that image of fatherliness is nigh on impossible. It would be very, very hard to then restore that type of image, to your kids. And I remember getting home that night and saying to my wife that it dawned on me, and there was nothing that had happened that night. It just kind of was a aha moment that's very similar for us in the pastorate as well. Of you can be friends with your congregants and things, and maybe even there are congregation members who you've been friends with, maybe even before you became a pastor, and so you've got this long history. Um, But you can never really be less than their pastor anymore. You know, that role now kind of supersedes and usurps all of these other ordinary, um, kind of earthly roles that you may have had prior. And boy, does that change things. So, what are your having said that and being, that now that has I've come to that realization. What are your least favorite parts? And maybe that's not the right way to ask it, but again, lack of, not knowing how else to ask it better. I think you know what I'm getting at. What are the parts of ministry that you just sometimes walk away and go, "Lord, this is hard." And I think of Jeremiah, I think of there's so many examples in scripture that you could point to. Jesus himself, obviously, who in the garden just the night before he was crucified would go, "This is tough," and my closest friends who are supposed to be here praying and awake are not even faithful enough to do that with me. I mean, it's so yeah.
I think the hardest thing that I've gone through in the years of doing this is the willingness on behalf of so many people to simply walk away from the relationship without any explanation, without any seemingly no remorse,
Yeah.
just almost be cast away. And I posted something about a year ago, and I still remember the somewhat vitriolic response that I received from certain people. And it was a post of me preaching, and I can't remember the context of what I was preaching, but I said it is very tough in ministry when you invest in the lives of people and you're there for the birth of their children, you're there for the death of their parents, you're there when they are in the hospital suffering, and then for one reason or another, they choose to simply vanish from your life, and there's no real explanation. You just turn around one day and they've either gotten upset about something or they've decided to move on. And people got upset with me because, "Oh, well, how dare you? Ministry's not, you're not earning the right in their life for that explanation. You're owed nothing." It was like the response I was getting from people because everybody online has an opinion. They're like armpits. Everybody's got at least two and they all stink. But but the attitude that I was trying to convey was the attitude of pain that is associated with, my children have kids they play with who 2 weeks later they're not there anymore. "Daddy, where did this person go?" "Well, they're not with us anymore. They've decided to go somewhere else. They've decided to move on." And that is so common now that people will, we have a phrase, jumping from lily pad to lily pad, right? They're not consistent. And it's not everyone. I mean, we have people, I'm thankful to say we've got people that have been in our church for 50 years,
Yeah.
but they're rare. And so that I think is the hardest part. We've had people that were some of our dearest friends who now won't talk to us at all. And you don't really get an explanation of, what have I done to hurt you? What have I done to offend you? What have I done to make me go from being a man who you saw as your spiritual guide, leader, father, as you said, to now being someone who is not even your friend? Um, so that when you said ministry is people, that's right. And sometimes that's the hard part
Yeah. For
is
good or ill. That's right. Yeah.
that's right. And so, that's an experience that is hard to explain to someone who's never been in it. Years ago, my wife and um, I was in a particularly difficult time of ministry, and we took a week off to go and be away. We ended up visiting a Presbyterian church, you know, of course, hashtag superior theology, right? And as I sat in the worship service, I didn't, I don't go into churches and identify myself. "Hi, I'm Pastor Foskey, blah, blah, blah." I don't do that. I prefer people not know
Yeah.
because then I don't have to explain anything. "Why aren't you in church today?" Yeah, whatever. So, but that day I was just going through a period that was very difficult. And the man noticed me, the preacher noticed me, and he asked me if afterwards if he could talk to me. I said, "Sure." And he said, "You're a pastor, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, how did you know that?" And he said, "Well, you were paying better attention than most people." It's his own words. He said, "I could just tell that you were like with me the whole time." He said, "Most people aren't." This is a great answer, by the way. It is so funny. But he was a PCA pastor in Daytona, and, he and I ended up spending an hour just talking in his office about the difficulties of ministry. But the part of the story that's relevant to our conversation is, my wife sat with his wife, and we're lamenting my wife and I again, we're going through a difficult season of ministry, and my wife was lamenting some of the difficulties, and the lady said to her something that I'll never forget, and I still don't know that I agree, but it was it was from a seasoned, older woman,
Mm.
so I can't just dismiss it. She told my wife, she said, "You're not gonna really have any friends." And, she said, "Because people will always look at you different because of who you are. And because of that, they're not really gonna be your friends."
It's one of the
And I
reasons that we need each other
Yeah, no,
as
no
guys to
doubt.
do that. I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, I'm sorry.
No, but you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, you know what she meant.
Yeah.
What she meant was people are gonna come, people are gonna go. They're gonna treat you friendly while they're with you, but they will easily discard you. And that was the point she was trying to get across, was how easily discarded people in the position we are in are in the lives of so many people. And again, I'm not saying we're owed anything, right? If as you know, as the old saying goes, preach the gospel, die and be forgotten, right? Like that, like we have a goal, preach the gospel, but that is the hard part. The hard part is, you know, just my wife says sometimes, that the benefit of not being in the ministry would be that your friends would just be your friends. And so, I mean, I'm being pretty vulnerable right now to anybody who watches this. This is the hard part. And I'm a pretty happy guy. I'm a pretty jovial, laughing, cut up, you know, and most people in my church know that. So I have a good fun relationship with people, and people know that I can be serious to the point that if they have an issue, they can come to me for counseling. They know I'm going to come to them if things are difficult, or if they need to be encouraged or called to account. They know that. That's not a but what I'm saying is we have a lot of good relationships, but how so often those relationships can can go south just because you said something someone doesn't like, or just because you did something that someone doesn't agree with. So quickly, so quickly they can be destroyed.
Yeah. It's when the Stephen Lawson thing happened, like
Oh, yeah.
a ton of people in our world, I made a response video to it. I mean, it was a bigger deal, honestly, than I even kind of expected it to be, because I guess I was not aware of how popular, in especially in reform circles, he really was. He was never my cup of tea. That doesn't mean that I never listened to a sermon from him and went, "Hey, that was great." I mean, I did.
You know what's funny? Can I just for a moment say you're like the 5th guy, because I said the same thing, and I've heard so many people say that he wasn't really our cup of tea, and here's what I meant by that. I never really listened to a lot of his preaching because I didn't really like the style and the cadence and all that, and I think that's what people mean.
Yeah.
And it does surprise me of his level of popularity because of how many people say what you just said. He sound like a bird, like "Rawr," like sound like the penguin. And if anybody gives me a hard time, look, I'm not the one who had a mistress. So anyway, get mad at me. But
Touche.
but the point is, I always felt like his cadence was all awkward. His style was polished to a fault. I think there was a lot of yeah. He was never my favorite
Yeah,
preacher,
it just
and
it
people
it wasn't.
get mad if you want,
That's
but
right, that's right. It just he wasn't he he just wasn't for me.
no,
And I mean, and there's elders in my church who would be like, I mean, that he would have been near the top for some of the guys,
sure,
elders in my, so I
for
know that
certain guys, he was the guy.
that's
Yeah,
it, that's it. Especially after the passing of RC, it was kind of he was almost in many ways kind of the face of Ligonier. Um, but it just wasn't, he wasn't for me. But I say that, and I made a response video. I have a fairly small channel, nothing like what a lot of guys, including yourself, have. And again, I don't say that pejoratively or in like, I wish. I mean, it's just a fact. Um, but I got like 12,500 views on this video about Lawson, and
Sure.
I was like, what? I don't make videos that get 12,500 views. And, so it was just kind of ridiculous. And one of the things that I kind of said in the video was, how do we as pastors, and this would be true of just your run of the mill, Christian lay people as well. How can you protect yourself from this type of fall? And there were 9 pieces of advice that I gave, and that was just an arbitrary thing. I came up with it myself. This wasn't like something that was out of some, tome from the, 1500s that I've studied and maybe you haven't. And I was like, 9, I mean, it wasn't that. It was just 9 pieces of advice that in my own experience I thought were wise. And one of them that relates to kind of what we've just been talking about was, and this happens all too often. I said, if you're a pastor, stop acting like you're in competition with the other pastors locally. You're not. It's not a competition. You know, those men should be some of your friends in town because they're some of the only men in town that actually understand the life you're leading and what it is you do. And again, everything you've just enumerated, all of the unique difficulties that we live with and all of the unique blessings. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there aren't incredible unique blessings. There are. Um, but the difficulties are real. And if you're not friendly with other pastors, um, man, you are missing out on a friend pool that you desperately need,
Sure.
because what you just said is so true. There's very few people who understand. And I mean, and that goes up to and including even some of our elders, and because when that difficult thing or person or group of people in the church really starts to come down on the leadership, it's easy for even the deacons and the elders to go, well, you should probably see the pastor about that. And again, it's not that they're trying to throw us under the bus. Most of us have wonderful deacons and wonderful elders. I know our church does. I'm certain yours does too. But they're not wrong. What you said earlier is true. We are professional. I mean, that this is our job. We're the only guy there that does this 24/7. The rest of them are guys that are, working at the bank and give of their time when they do. And so I don't blame them for saying, "Hey, you should probably go see Pastor so and so about that." But so even up to and including the guys that are the closest guys that we have at the church. I mean, the core team that we use and that we lean on and that help us make, all the decisions. Even for those guys, there is a delineation. So I just, that's my one big piece of advice to any of us that do this for a living is, man, sometimes we can get very territorial of, oh, I don't want, pastor so and so to steal some of my flock or whatever, and maybe you wouldn't even say that out loud, but you think it. And you think, well, I think I preach as good as him. Why is his church twice the size of mine? Or, and we get into all these silly games that we play sometimes with no one but ourselves. But you know, my biggest encouragement to other guys when I talk to them is lean on other pastors, make friends with, I mean, again, it's why your friendship and I mean, we're part of some chats and things that really that you've put me in on. So I'm grateful to you for that. But I mean, some of those groups that I get to kind of be myself in and say and vent and just be vulnerable in, man, they've been a godsend already. I mean, and some of these relationships are only 2, 3 months old, and I already it's such a release valve for people in our line of work to kinda go, "Oh, and
Yeah.
can I just kind of vomit for a little bit?" And
Yeah.
you guys won't judge me for it because tomorrow you might be the one that needs to vomit. And so man, thank you. Again, just a personal, I guess we're saying it in front of however many people will ever watch this, but just a thank you personally from me to you. Thank you for including me in and I say your weird little world because all of our pastor worlds are weird little worlds, and for letting me pray for you and you praying for me, and what an incredible, unbelievable gift that's already been, and I can only ever hope that I somewhat reciprocate to you and the other men in that group, um, the incredible kindnesses that you have all shown me.
Well, that's very grateful, or very I'm very grateful for you saying that, and I've enjoyed the same. And it is funny how God has connected me with certain men over the last 2 years through the podcast, mainly, that I would have never connected with otherwise. And there's older men now in my life who weren't there before. That's nice. There's men like you who are about my age that I'm feel more of a contemporary peer relationship with, and then there's younger men that are kind of coming along too, that I feel like, because I've always kind of used this sort of rubric, and that is, who is your Paul, who is your Barnabas, who is your Timothy, right? Like who is the person that's older than you that you're learning from? Who are the people that are around your age, both spiritually and physically, that you're learning with, and who are the young men that you're bringing along?
Like
And
fetus,
huh?
like
Like
fetus.
Fetus is my, he's my buddy. You already mentioned him earlier. Parker does so much
Yeah.
just to just his energy is infectious, and it's great because I just feel like like I'm running on fumes most of the time, and he's just like he's he's full foot to the gas, and I'm grateful, thankful to see that, and thankful to have him in my life,
Yeah.
just like having you in my life. Like, and so I do think that we need those 3 types of people.
It's yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But that kind of, and I'll try to wrap up with this and let you kind of finish, because we're about 45 minutes or so in, and I want to be respectful of your time. Um, that leads me to kind of the final thing that I want to talk about, which is it seems like with the advent of the megachurch movement, which I mean that what started in say the 70s, really took on some traction in the 80s, really hit its stride in the 90s, and early 2000s. It's still certainly going on. But I would say that, really, to me, growing up in the church, the biggest days of the megachurch movement, for me at least, were the 90s and into the early 2000s. That was when it was really at peak. Because Christian music was, I mean, like, you could watch MTV in the 90s and see Jesus Freak the Music video. And I mean, so there was this weird time in the late 90s and early 2000s where Christian subculture had really kind of made it. It was bizarre. So if you were a mega church pastor, man, in that era, you were kind of like a rock star. And so I would say it was probably with the advent of that movement where we started to trade men of pastors, let me be more specific, pastors of real character in for these, or gravitas, or whatever the word you want to use, for these men of incredible vulnerability. And you'd get these pastors that are like, "Man, I understand. I've struggled with porn too," or with fill in the blank with whatever sin.
Sure.
And for a while that seemed to appeal to a certain swath of American Christianity, and the harm that I think that did is still being weighed out and calculated. Whereas, to piggyback off what you just kinda said, where are the men at whatever age? They could be younger than you and I, they could be, roughly our age, or certainly they should be older than the guys older than us should hopefully be there, where, like Paul, they say, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Where they're men not of vulnerability, but of virtue. We went through this weird era as Americans, and certainly within the American church, where virtue almost was like a four-letter word, and what Joe Rigney would call hyper empathy, or hyper empathy, that book he wrote, which is not titled that, but it's about that. and this just unbridled vulnerability kind of changed all of that. How do you think we can restore um, the American church to a place where that virtue and that gravitas is what men behind the pulpit start to stand for? I mean, because again, you and I are both old enough that we remember when I was a boy, even to the non-believer, a pastor was a revered person in the community. You know, it meant something if you met a guy and he said, "Well, I'm a pastor," and you were like, "Oh," you know what I mean? Okay. You know, I mean, so how do we get that back, or can we even get that back?
Well, I do think we've turned a corner societally in many ways when it comes to the the clergy recognizing and understand what it means to be a pastor. Years ago, I was at a funeral. I work with a local funeral home, so I have an opportunity to. That's another thing I do is I do funerals for families that don't have ministers because it gives me an opportunity to preach the gospel to them. And I've met hundreds of families doing that. And I was at a funeral at the National Cemetery here in Jacksonville,
Mm,
and I'm standing at the National Cemetery about to do the funeral, and there's two guys maybe 6 to 10 feet away from me, and they're talking about church. They weren't talking to me, they were talking to each other, but I was exercising my pastoral prerogative and eavesdropping. So which is which is an important skill to have. Um, and so one of them said to the other, and this is, I am in no way exaggerating. This is exactly what he said. He said, "Yeah, man, I've been going to church recently and it's so awesome. Man, the church, the pastor, he's got a mohawk, and man, he's just not like what you think a pastor's supposed to, he's out there, he's got purple hair and mohawk and he's tattooed up." And it's like I'm listening to this, and again, I wish I were exaggerating. I promise I'm not, because I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, "Yeah, but who cares that he has a mohawk and tattoos?" And the reason why that mattered to that man, I think, because again, I don't know his heart or his mind, is because that's not what pastors used to be. And because it's different, somehow that makes it better. And that's the way society sees it. It's not what it used to be. This is that whole mindset. We're not your grandmother's church.
yeah,
I hate that phrase. I want to slap the slobber out of the mouth of the guy who says it, because I say, what do you mean? So the fact that your grandmother, who was a saint who served Christ her whole life and went to church, that's just that's not good enough anymore. That just serving Christ and being in a church is not good enough anymore. What do you need now that's not your grandmother's church? What is it that, so so I do take issue with a lot of how the modernization of the church has, I think, robbed some of that gravitas that you're asking for. One of the most popular pastors in our town, the most common thing that I hear about him is that he's funny. I don't hear that he's a good expositor, and he's not. I don't hear that he's particularly patient or loving or welcoming, because he's not. But I do hear that when he's up on stage walking around, because he doesn't have a pulpit, he just walks around talking, that he's funny, and he's not. So, and that's from somebody who knows a little something about humor.
yeah,
He's not funny, he's crass, and I really just have very little value in what he does. And I'm not gonna mention his name, and it's probably wrong that I'm even saying this, but people in town would probably know who I'm talking about, because it really is, it's indicative of what ministry has become. Can you entertain people for an hour? And you know what? Jerry Seinfeld is the best in the world at that. but he's not a pastor. Nate Bargatze is the best in the world at that, but he's not a pastor.
Yeah.
And so this may be the biggest shift is that we have gone from being pastors to entertainers. And the gravitas of an entertainer is different than the gravitas of a pastor because entertainers are celebrities, pastors are not celebrities. And so this is maybe why so many pastors see themselves as celebrities.
Hmm.
So these are just thoughts. I'm just kind of maybe being a little too raw and real, but this is the real thoughts is why is it not what it used to be? Because it's not what it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It that used to be that the only celebrity in a pastor's world was the Jesus Christ that we get to preach about. That
That's right.
he,
Yeah.
he's the name above all names, and my name, you know, my name's my name means nothing. It's it's humbling sometimes as you get older to realize your great grandkids or your great great grandkids, they won't really know you. I mean,
Yeah.
and if that's true in your own family, how much more true outside of it? Well, brother Keith, thank you for your time today. Honestly, thank you for your vulnerability. I wanted this to be something that lay people could watch and maybe go, I didn't know that. And God willing, pastors will be able to watch this episode and go, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not, because I think that's one of the greatest devices that the devil uses against us in ministry is no one has it like you have it. No one would, you're doing it wrong, and
Yeah.
because you're doing it wrong, that's why you have so many problems. That's why you don't have any friends. And the, no, this is Jeremiah's experience in ministry. Sadly, that's the experience. I mean, Paul's experience in ministry. That is what sadly that's why not many are called. And
Yeah.
you use that Spurgeon quote in your podcast Tuesday night, and it's one of my favorites as well. Of if you can see yourself doing, and again, I'm paraphrasing, if you can see yourself doing absolutely anything else and being happy, go do that.
Yeah.
But if, like Jeremiah, you have a fire in your bones that will consume you if you don't do this, then this is probably what you need to be doing. So, brother, thank you. I love you. I'm grateful for you and for your family and for your ministry there in Jacksonville and your ministry online. I first time I ever saw one of your videos, I couldn't have imagined calling you a friend and actually being able to, pick up the phone and call or text you. And what a gift that has been in my life. So again, and I'm not blowing smoke. I truly, and I think we've gotten to know each other well enough. You know that I mean it. I mean it. You're a gift to me and to others. And on those dark days when you feel um, alone and you feel down, please remember that. Please remember that there are men like myself who hold you in high esteem and are grateful for what we get to see Christ doing in and through you. So, thank you, buddy.